Alright, let's get on with the portrait painting. So I am working on an 11 by 14 inch cotton canvas that has been pre-toned with burnt umber oil paint, and I'm going to use a umber sketch. So I'm just using a little bit of burnt umber diluted with my mineral spirits. So since we are working from life, you can clearly see the model to the left of your screen. We're going to not try to, make it like a perfect photographic rendition of the model. And this is actually one of the most, I think, expressive types of uh, painting, in my opinion, especially when it comes to portrait painting. You have a model sitting in front of you. You only have maybe 2 hours, excluding the breaks. So that is 3 hours with 10-minute breaks in between 20-minute poses. So the way we do it here is that the model poses for 20 minutes at a time with a 10-minute break in between. So that being said, there is a little bit of a time constraint when you're creating this type of portrait. So you can see that I'm very quickly putting in a basic shape. So we've already got the composition mapped out here. So right now it's just burnt umber for the first 20 minutes, just because I was kind of rushing setting up the potluck table and all that stuff. So I didn't have time to put all my colors out. So just using mineral spirits and burnt umber. And the mineral spirits is just to dilute the paint. That being said, if you want to know exactly what materials I'm using, you can feel free to scroll down to the description box down below. Just a little disclaimer here. So when I was editing this, I noticed that her hair is up. So you can see her ear to the left of your screen. That's my mistake. When I filmed this portion where you can see the model, the hair was in a different position than it was when I was painting, though you can see her hair in the normal position when you see her and the painting at the same time. And so I was talking about the materials. So if you are also interested in purchasing the same type of materials that I am using, you can feel free to click on the affiliate links to Amazon. So if you click on the links next to the materials in the description box down below, you can also purchase the same type of materials that I am painting with. So now we have a little bit of an indication there for the eye socket. So we have omitted the center line for now. So I just kind of have a shape for the eye sockets, basically two lines for the eyes, one mark for the nose, one mark for the mouth. So here's the thing: when you're working from life, especially in the first pose, it's a really good idea to basically get the verb, get the action of the pose. So I was already deciding right there that I would see a little bit of the model's eye to the right of the canvas. So let's take a look at our model again. So you can see here, even in this recording, that you can see a little bit of the model's right eye. So that's how I'm deciding to pick the position that the model is making with respect to the with respect to the canvas. I'm also indicating that she has her chin tilted up a little bit. So I think in the, oh, hi Jim, that's my friend Jim. But anyway, also indicating a little bit more of a tilt. So I think in the first, I don't know what it was, like 20 minutes or so. 20 minutes. I think it was like the first few minutes. Her chin was tilted up a little bit. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the experience of painting from life, because it is a really, really demanding task. And so models do shift once in a while, and you can either correct them or you can choose which pose that you like. I certainly like to choose between different poses. So in the beginning, I had her, oh, there goes Jim again, Jim Atkins, a good friend of mine. Okay, so in the beginning, I placed her chin raised up a little bit more, and I kind of liked it. And then she started to settle, so her chin went down a little bit. Now, this isn't a fault of the model. This happens with everyone that poses. Imagine me trying to sit there and be still for this long. no, I couldn't do it. So variation is part of this, okay? So when you are painting from life, you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to know how to, um, you have to know the language between the shapes, all right? So what I'm doing is I'm not measuring at all, and I'm creating all of these shapes optically. So I have an eraser brush, I have an additive brush, and I have a dry brush. That's how I'm working with this umber sketch. So right there is the dry brush. So what I'm doing with the dry brush, you can see right there, is laying out kind of a little uh, a curve to the side of the eye and a little curve to the side of the eyebrow. Notice how our eyebrow has kind of like a distinct angle from one side to the other, and that's what I'm trying to get with the the dry brush. Now this is the second 20 minutes sitting, so now you can see here I'm charging up the color value web. So since we are working really, really quickly, I'm using the alla prima technique, but I started off subdividing the major forms for the eyes first. So I know that it's not the most aesthetically appealing image right now, but what I'm going for in this stage is just locking in the eye sockets, because just on a practical level, when you are painting from life, it's much easier to lock in where the eyes are and hold that position fixed. So we have the eyes, a very slight angle, you can tell, even though in the painting, like I said before, we're painting her with her chin raised up a little bit. And that's just the pose that I liked, and that's the one that I stuck with. So locking in the angle for the eyes and putting in these subtle halftones and building onto the light and shadow shapes. That's how I'm approaching the start of this painting. So the nose will not be as difficult to move. So I'm talking to you based on a practical level. See how simple the shape for the nose can be. And again, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of energy when you're working from life. And that's really something that I want to convey to you. And I think a lot of that energy that we get when we're working from life comes from the fact that we're aware of the timer. So when you're working from life, there's usually a timer, especially when you're working with a portrait group or a figure group or something like that. You're aware of that timer. You're wondering when that timer is going to go off. It's kind of like a psychological conditioning. You anticipate the timer. So, like I usually say, portrait goes through an awkward stage, okay? But for me, I will admit I was trying to avoid too much of a heavy, awkward stage at this point. That's why I knew that if I targeted the eyes and then painted in the nose, I knew after that I would be able to come in with these larger shapes, as you're seeing here, and sculpting out in a very simple and rapid fashion the side planes of the face. So there is an energy in this type of painting, in this type of study, that you don't really get too much in a excuse me, in a more like a long pose. Now, don't get me wrong. There's stuff to learn in both the short pose and the long pose. I'm just telling you what we can get out of the short pose. And now, since you're not really seeing too much of the palette, I can explain to you what these colors are. Um, so that darker halftone is a little bit of the alizarin crimson with the ivory black and maybe a touch or a sprinkle here and there of the ultramarine blue. And the flesh tones are no more complicated than basically our cadmium red, alizarin crimson, flake white, and burnt umber. Not much more going into the flesh tones. I will say I'm not too satisfied with the camera shot that I have of our model. It's kind of a little bit too bright. I think I might have had the light sensitivity a bit too high. So our model's skin tones aren't as light as they appear on the screen. I'm not sure if it appears better on your screen than my screen. Um, but again, that's another thing to note when you're working from life. There are two things that are going to be at your advantage as opposed to working from photograph. The two advantages of working from life are perspective and color. So when we're observing color from nature, we're really getting the highest resolution possible, because when you take the photograph, when you are working from the photograph, it kind of puts in this, like a filter, okay, because each camera has its own type of resolution, the pixels, or even the video. Is it 720p, is it 1080p? And we don't get any of that. We don't have any of that to worry about when we're working from life, though working from life is rather limited in terms of the time. But the information that we get from life, I think this is really one of the best ways to study. So now that we've put in the large planes for the cheekbone, the mandible, now we're working our way towards the orbicularis oris. And so remember that awkward stage I always talk about? Yeah, we're definitely going to be entering in the awkward stage now. At a little over the halfway point in today's episode, here is the awkward stage. So that means that it just looks a little strange now that we're starting to block in some of the forms for the orbicularis oris. And the way that I'm trying to approach the mouth is to map out all the shapes around it, and then put in smaller shapes over top of those larger shapes for the mouth. It is different to how I painted the eyes, I will admit. So I'm using a little bit of strategy here. So with the eyes, I relied heavily on that burnt umber drawing that I made in the first 20 minutes. And the nose, I did rely heavily on the umber sketch, but not as much. You can see that I moved the nose a little bit. The mouth, you can see I'm not that worried about it at all. It's just a simple little mark. And I can even go in now with the background. So I'm just using, that's most likely just burnt umber and ivory black with a touch of alizarin crimson permanent. And again, if you want to use the same type of materials that I'm using, be sure to check out the Amazon links in my description box down below. So very carefully now we're looking at the outside shape. And I will pause momentarily just so I don't fill up the episode with too much talk, since this is in voiceover style. Like I usually say, when I do the voiceover after the fact, it's almost like I'm there watching the footage with you, and kind of guiding you along the footage. So we're kind of watching this together. And you can see I'm not really using too much medium on the brush. Now I'm using lots of medium. So could you see the difference there? So now I applied a little more of the Neo McGilp. So Neo McGilp is a fast drawing medium. It's a gel-like medium. And again, there's an Amazon link in my description box. So I used the Neo McGilp very sparingly, because the window lighting in the studio actually makes the paintings glare a bit too much when I use too much medium. And remember, each time I show a glimpse of the model and kind of put in that dark transition, it is so that it mimics you looking through my eyes as we are painting from life. And the background color, I'm not going to make it terribly complicated. I assure you, it's nothing more than just sap green and burnt umber. So just sap green and burnt umber. So now you can see that the background is kind of glaring a lot, right? So that is because I did use much more medium in the background and with the hair. So that's a little tip. If you struggle with the glare too much when you're oil painting, try using less medium and see if that will make a difference for you. It also kind of depends on the room that you're painting. All right, so now with a little bit of the alizarin crimson, cadmium red, and a little bit of the burnt umber, we're now going to sketch in a shape for the mouth. So there you see a simple little kind of blob for the mouth. And I'm keeping it simple and easy just because I know that the mouth is one of those things that tends to move quite a bit. That is, a portrait is a painting in which there's a little something wrong with the mouth, as I'm paraphrasing as a John Singer Sargent quote. So the mouth, I'm strategically trying to keep it more simple than the rest of the shapes, okay? Just because I'm anticipating that I most likely will get the mouth wrong at first. But let's face it, since this is an alla prima painting from life, I'm trying to get the shapes as accurate as I can, as quickly as I can. So here we are now in the larger view. So you're seeing me mix up the alizarin crimson permanent, the ultramarine blue, and a little bit of the neo McGilt medium. And now we're going to be pushing some of the darks for the hair. So I like the shape of the hair, so I'm going to follow along the direction of the hair. And I'm going to use a little bit of the light burnt umber color that I had put in the hair before, just to kind of let some of the brush strokes show. And now with the sap green and the burnt umber, see, there you go. I told you it was just sap green and burnt umber. Now we're going to go and put in the background. So there is the background, very quick and simple. Now, as you notice, the background from life is a little bit more dull. It's a little bit less bright. See here? So the background is kind of a flat, like a flat dark green. And I chose to kind of push the green hue a little bit more. So again, especially when you're working from life, there's a lot of freedom in, not trying to perfectly copy what you're looking at and instead relate the shapes to one another. And now we're going into the sternocleidomastoid, well, the side of the sternocleidomastoid, the neck bone, the neck muscle. It's the tube-like muscles surrounding the neck, and then on the bottom, it points towards the suprasternal notch. And now we're going to start to paint in some little shadow shape for the side of the hair. And again, we're using the alla prima technique as opposed to the classical one because we are making a one-time portrait. Remember, the alla prima technique just means working wet on wet. And the way that I'm approaching this is using less medium, so little to no medium with the first layer, and then using more medium to layer the paint. And now it's just down to the final brush strokes. So with the tiny brush, I'm just going to be adjusting the contour a little bit and then just some of the edges within the forms of the face, but not too much because I want this to be a much more free and kind of expressive portrait. That being said, I really hope that today's episode helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork. And as always, remember, in a world that can be so negative, be the spark that ignites positivity amongst all of us. I'll be back with our next episode tomorrow.